have with us today the fourth person that I know who had a precognition prior to 911. He also has a UFO experience in his past. He has a grandmother who was a shaman, and a cousin who is a police psychic, or a psychic detective. He is an ardent student of mythology and has attended various shamanic retreats with me. And one of the interesting things about Kenny is that he and I are often mistaken for each other, even though we really don't look anything alike. So without further ado, I bring you Kenny Alton. One of the tie-ins that I see with you and the Mothman story is that, along with me and Tommy and actually two other people, so there's 5 people I know that have precognitions of 911. The other 2 that weren't mentioned earlier are Jim Woodring and Penny Van Horn, both artists who even drew pictures the day before that had very similar content. You know, they were about attacks. They're about airplane attacks. The artwork that they were doing. So let's start there. Tell us about 911.
Well, my experience beforehand was certainly, I guess where it really began was I had dreams of war, skies filled with airplanes and bombings, and so these progressive dreams. But I'd say 3 days before it happened, I started getting this kind of anxious feeling. I felt like the only thing that kept coming in my head was shit's gonna hit the fan. And the night before, I was out seeing my friend play his band play at I Spy, and we got into a discussion about, just things that are going on in our personal lives, our personal experiences. And I began talking about how I felt that soon something was going to happen, something intense, something major that is going to have the perception of being an intense tragedy, but will, in a sense, open our eyes up to something even more, kind of a awakening process to, which usually, the knock, the slap in the face or the kick in the ass is usually the process that comes into understanding a progression of one's not necessarily personal enlightenment, but also I think it's a cultural enlightenment. There needs to be a tragedy that brings us to the other side. I mean, the most traumatic experience in a human's existence is the birthing process, which is you go through that. What has the appearance of being a traumatic experience brings you into the next realm, into the next world.
It sounds like there's a connection between what you're saying and the fact that the Mothman shows up in advance of tragic events.
The connection of, I think most definitely there's a projection on whatever is going to. I think there's no such thing as objective reality. So the applications, I mean, what one considers blue as a color, are we seeing the same perception as that color in each human's iris or whatever? So whatever the Mothman is, it gets translated into our kind of psyche of what we understand or what we can perceive as being an entity. Though it's definitely something that I don't know if we can actually truly visualize. And so our projections, I mean, if we want to put it as this flying creature with wings and red eyes, that's how we apply our understanding. I mean, you hear poltergeist in your house, and you hear. I mean, this specifically happened when I was in the Philippines with my parents, and crazy stuff would happen. We would hear noises in this resort that we're staying in that was owned by my cousin, and I would have these dreams, or these, what I thought was like these brown. I could see these brown boots, these black boots with these brown pants walking over me, and hearing all these noises throughout the night while I'm sleeping. And my father would hear the same noise, and his conception of it was wind, or animals wandering around. And I was like, no, that's definitely somebody walking around, like walking in my room or walking. And the next morning I go down, and my aunt is telling me that there's a lot of Japanese soldiers that haunt this area, supposedly. So that's our perceptions, our individual perceptions, and as a collective unconsciousness or a collective psyche of a culture gets projected in certain ways, and some people will perceive this entity, the Mothman, I think, as that of what there's like a certain kind of psyche connection between certain people, and that's what their perceptions are going to understand, and somebody else is going to perceive it as something else. But there's definitely an entity that comes out, and that has this precursor towards certain events, I'd say.
Something that an idea that has interested me lately is the idea. It's a Buddhist concept, and it has to do with the duality of emptiness and form. These are the two major polarities, if you will, governing our observation of reality. Things appear to be either empty or solid, and we experience these emotionally as well. Events connected to the Garuda, like ghosts or hauntings or psychic phenomena, these involve beings whose molecules seem to be spaced out enough that they can pass through other seemingly solid surfaces, like walls and stuff and so forth. So, does that bring up anything for you?
Well, I mean, the emptiness in form. There's always a passing in and out. I think that this character, this entity of the Mothman, that passes in and out of this realm in a sort of like Shiva dance. I think in Buddhism, there's in most indigenous cultures, and in most, I'd say almost all religions that I've studied, they're all pretty much basically have a concept of this flowing and this ebbing and flowing, this in and out, this breathing in, the breathing of through meditation, this kind of inhale, exhale, the circular aspects of in Hinduism, and Christianity has its concepts of moving in and out, and I think most, like in indigenous folk tales, there's a lot of these stories that have this kind of a period of even like the feminine to the masculine, or the flooding to the desertification of lands. There's always this kind of in and out, and then I think, as above so below, Goethe would say that there's a reflection of everything, and there's a basic in the concept of emptiness and form. There's that. So there's always a passing in and out. There's always a fluctuation. There's always the bad times, and then the good times, the salad days, and then the times of trouble and strife, and it's a natural. I mean, even the polarities of the Earth are in constant motion, to where what's the North magnetic force eventually switches to the south, and so there's this just from the movement of the tectonic plates, and there's always an adjustment, and there's been studies in the scientific world that has happened quite a few times in the history of this Earth. So so there's this basic form, and I think all religions are based on this idea of the inhale or the exhale. I mean, this kind of beat that goes on in this rhythm that goes on. And Native Americans with the drumming, there's all these folk tales around that and how the drum became, but it's always about this rhythm, and the rhythm of passing in from a form to a to emptiness space. I think it's a continuum, and it's a continuum that just goes back and forth, and a tragedy of this proportion, or deliberate tragedy of this proportion. Who knows? I think a lot of things are instigated, even like self-instigated. There's a crashing by design in our personal psyche of like, well, I need to move on in my life, so you cause this friction, and and I think there's a unconsciousness in the powers that be that might instigate a tragedy like 9/11, and whatever the reasons were. I mean, not that I could even come to understanding. There could be, the bringing of paradise, the whole Eden concept of the second coming. The following the whole, the tradition in the Old Testament with the prophetic concepts of the apocalypse. And Columbus himself was in search of Eden, of instigating the coming of Christ. He thought if he could get to the new world and find the Eden, find this new world, that it would instigate a new coming. He wrote it in his journals that pretty much was his attempt to find the new world, was to bring on the coming of Christ, this new world. And so whatever the powers that be are doing, but there is an attempt to bring in the tragedy, to bring in the apocalypse, so that there will be a transference over. Some speculate that that was what the atomic bomb was about, or Aleister Crowley using that to break the barriers between the spiritual world, or whatever the different barriers there are between our realm and the other realm, and so it's I think it's a continuous thing that happens, that in all the and tragedies can be, I think, looked upon that as, it's all metaphorical. Everything's and all mythological. Everything's in that format, and the mythology that we choose, whether it's Christianity or Buddhism or Hinduism or Islam, that's what's going to instigate our mind, and that's where we're going to be pursued. But it's all, Gandhi says all religions are true, and I think that it's all basically the same thing.
One of the things that has happened to you that we've spoken about a few times over the years is a UFO sighting that you had as a child that you remember very clearly. However, your relatives, as if they were in a trance, did not remember the event, even though this was a very slow-moving UFO. And there's exciting news, it seems, is that, and it is that your brother seems to now remember the event. And could you talk about that?
That was a strange incident. When that whole area, it was my grandmother's house, which is near McCord Air Force Base and near Fort Lewis in Tacoma,
that's where the DC sniper.
Yes.
lived?
Yes. Well, that area, he bought the gun there. I don't know what connection that has, but this area is quite interesting. I moved when we came. I was living overseas in Thailand, and we came to the States through and stayed in there. And a lot of wild incidents that kind of formulated my alternative mentality, if you want to call it that, happened in overseas, but it also happened in this area. This is a lot of strange incidents happen. I remember waking up one night and there was finding this child praying at my bedside at me, and trying to figure out what was going on there. But this particular incident happened when we were out. My family, my grandfather he was a singer, and we all had to do like these a cappella songs, and if you were an Alton, you had to sing. So we stayed up quite late singing these songs out in the backyard, and we all looked up and had seen this strange, spherical object in some strange way that had a trail of exhaust that had a kind of membrane that's and folded the trail of exhaust or whatever you want to call it that was going behind this thing, and it was traveling in a very strange manner. I mean, it wasn't. A plane has a distinctive motion. This was something very steady, and I mean, a plane needs to rev up at a certain amount of RPMs and has to go a certain amount of speed to be airborne, and it's obvious. It's kind of this constant motion. Even in larger planes, it needs to go faster, and smaller planes. But this was like it was just very different, and I can't even explain it. Even looking at balloons, it wasn't that erratic. It was constant, but it wasn't. It was as if it hovering. It was hovering. Everybody saw it. I mean, we had talked about it right after the incident happened, right after it passed over, and it lingered above us for quite a bit, which was strange. And everybody had their speculation about it. And there was, because I remember the discussion going on. If it was a balloon, or my uncle thought it looked like a Zeppelin, but just the whole strange membrane behind it with the exhaust being captured. And it was a strange. But everybody had a different speculation about it. Everybody had their different perception. And the next day, I remember thinking, well, how are we going to find out about this? My dad just kind of flippantly said, well, maybe it'll be in the paper the next day. And so for me, I couldn't stop thinking about it. This is a crazy incident that happened. And the next day, I remember waking up, going there, and nobody remembered it. I ran and said, "Is the paper here yet? Anything in the paper about what we saw last night?" And nobody could remember. My father couldn't remember it. Nobody was like. They asked me what I was talking about. It just drove me nuts, because I knew I was solid in my mind that this incident happened, and even we had moved to California in the Santa Cruz Hills, and my brother and my father had seen. My brother had seen some UFOs, or seen these things, 3 objects flying through the hills, and they couldn't figure out what it was. My father's a pilot, and he's actually himself had been flying, and something was below him, and he couldn't get a read on it, and he still to this day is not quite sure what happened. It just it floated next to him, below him for a while, had lights, and it zoomed off, and never ever got it clear, and he just kind of let it go. But just recently, on this incident that happened, my brother had we were out to breakfast, my family, and my brother had brought it up just quite out of the blue, and I was like, well, and I asked him, I wanted to get this straight. I go, well, draw what you saw, and I'll draw what I saw, and so we're not like trying to, as if I was going to inspire his visuals by discussing it, because right when he mentioned it, it was the same incident, it was the same night, and he drew it, and it was exactly the same as what I did, and what I saw, and which was strange, because I mentioned this incident quite a few times in my life, seeing if at least one of these times somebody would remember what happened, because it really infuriated me, as if I was the only one that saw this thing. And
sounds like that you have a psychic history in your family. You have lots of family members that have this gift, and Well, do you think that that you've seen these UFOs because of your increased perception?
Well, yeah, I think there's a possibility of certain incidents in my life, because of maybe my inheritance, as my mother would say, and my grandmother, who was the healer in the Philippines, and she had told me this. She had told me in this strange incident. I had one when I was 25. I had a concussion, and I had memory loss for 3 days. But basically, what happened to me was I went into the underworld, or I went into the next realm, and my grandmother, my Lola, my Filipino grandmother, which I didn't know too well. I mean, I knew when I was living there, when I was a kid, but I didn't ever, moving to the States, I lost this connection with her. But as I was I was in this unconscious stage, and I was, just doing, I guess this is what I was told to me afterwards, because like I say, I had memory loss for like 3 days. I was quoting Dante and Rilke poems, and I even had, I think I had a kind of like a Buddhist concept of the soul, where I kept telling them that I was dead, and they were like trying to, freaking out that I was dead, and they're saying, no, you're not dead. And I said, no, I'm dead. You don't understand. My soul is encased in my memory. Since I have no memory, I'm dead. So there's that, once you're gone, there's this renewal of your soul. And this was this constant thing in my head. But I remember coming out. I remember the first thing that once I started like being able to recognize people, or my friend Kevin Mesher, and I was able to get his name, because I could never remember who he was, but I would say, who are you again? And he'd constantly repeat his name, Kevin Mesher. When I finally had to relearn his name as this new person, this born person, I said to him, like, I remember my first memory of what I was able to register consciously was I had been someplace. I had gone somewhere. And I kept saying things like I'd gone to the underworld, and when I came to, my major memory of this incident was going to my dead grandmother, who had died, and I had talked to her, and she had said that I have this inheritance that I have to deal with, that it's going to be hard for me to adjust in this world, but once you understand what it is, then you'll be able to, it's going to cause a lot of trouble, she also said, but it's yours, and you have to, that's an inheritance of yours. I had no idea what she was talking about, because I didn't know that she was a healer at all, and once I got on my feet again, and I was able to find my apartment, and able to go out in the world and drive a car, and I ended up calling my mother, and I said, look, this strange incident happened to me. Reason I hadn't been in contact for a while was I had a concussion. I had memory loss for a few days, but I gotta ask you something. I felt like I went and saw, this is my mother's mother, I went and saw grandmother, and she told me that something like she was a witch doctor, and my mother's like, telling me, the first thing she said to me is, we need to talk. She didn't say anything else, but she says, we need to talk. So, and she didn't want to do it over the phone. So I went and met with her, and she told me what my grandmother was and what she did, and basically my inheritance. She also, she would give us these little talismanic things that she would make in a script that I don't know what it is, but these little things. And I was the only one that still had. My mother and I are the only ones out of my family that has been able to keep this thing. So, it's almost this transference over of healing powers or psychic powers or whatever. But yeah, I'd say it was a heightened awareness. I mean, when I would go to the Philippines and with my family, my father would see none of these things, and I would see them all the time. I would see lights. I would see auras. My aunt told me that my body would glow at night. You know, she would stay up and just watch my body glow, she would say. And so there's these weird incidents that would happen, and but my father would never see anything, so it would never really register. So yeah, I would say there's certain, because of this inheritance towards in that side of my family, I think maybe the perceptions that I've seen or the intuitive aspects that I've felt.
2003, I sat down with Ben Camp, aka DJ Novocaine, a well-known Seattle writer and countercultural figure who starred in my film about WTO. Ben's father is one of the world's foremost experts in the game of Go, and Ben is currently the technical director at Taos Public Radio in Taos, New Mexico. One of the interesting things about this interview is that when we were deciding where to have the interview, we both got the image of Northgate Mall, so we decided to go there. It turns out the mall is a possible window area.
So, my first question is, for someone like me who's very skeptical of any kind of occurrence that would be called paranormal or alien-based, would you say there's any kind of unity in the spiritual or psychological themes of alien visits, or is it strictly a very unique thing? Is each visit a unique visit, or is there a theme that runs through all the visits that we've encountered? Because I'm a skeptic, I asked that question, you know what I mean?
There's both.
Well, do you have a personal opinion? You don't think it's one or the other, that there's a unity of message or general type, or let's say, I don't know how to ask the question. I just want to know if you would elaborate a little bit on that issue.
There's a black helicopter up there.
Nice.
Well, you find wild variety. I mean, you find very original things happening in some of the sightings. Just, one-of-a-kind things. One of the ways you can find out, or you can get a sense that someone is telling you, making up a story about a UFO, is that they'll give you a standard kind of a description.
Sure.
Something that they've seen on TV, but it's in these really bizarre details that that sort of set the real sightings apart. And then you do find connections between some of these details, some of these little things that show up in different sightings from different time periods. Trying to think of some of them. I mean, just the fact that the Men in Black switched from Cadillacs to Volkswagens in 1968. A lot of people think they know what Men in Black are. They've seen a movie, the popular movie or something, and they think that they're government agents. But actually, a lot of their behavior seems otherworldly, as if they're from another dimension. The Men in Black, from my own experience, which is really all I can speak from, is that I may have been a victim of a Man in Black. And a victim's not really the right word, but there seems to have been a family incident that myself and one of my sisters have nightmares about, which is that we were interrogated in the middle of the night by some Men in Black. In other words, we were already asleep, and the nightmare is we're in the living room and everyone's there. We've all woken up, sort of, and we're all there being interrogated by these two guys who may or may not have been human. There are aspects of the nightmare, and some of these are repeated nightmares, or nightmares that have shown up in various ways, come in different forms. But a lot of them involve seeing these Men in Black, and when you would look at them, there'd be a shadow or a void. I mean, it's not like a memory of a real person, but a memory of something more primeval or unconscious.
Sure.
I mean, I don't speak of it in terms of a real event, because even if it were to seem like a real event, it would still be an interface between the unconscious and the conscious mind, and you have to take some responsibility for what you're seeing. You know, if you are seeing this event, if it's paranormal or whatever, your mind is playing an active role in how that plays out, and maybe even its formation, because the phenomenon is attracted to certain kinds of people that have certain electric energy fields or have certain psychic qualities, or even people that are going through traumas or changes in their lives. You know, it can occur to anyone, and they seem to have something to do with a person's mental state. But it doesn't mean it's not a real thing. I mean, it has. It's just like you flipped into an alternate dimension for a short time. And you know, to get your head around it, you sort of have to accept the fact that there are parts of our everyday life that are other dimensional, or that do enter other dimensions, and part of our psyches that enter other dimensions. And if you just acknowledge that, then you can go ahead and continue to look at the phenomenon without having a knee-jerk reaction to push it away.
That's exactly what I was just going to ask you too. There has to be a certain amount of a disbelief of shock process that takes place as soon as a human experiences something that we've never experienced before. And how you deal with that shock, I think maybe could be a large answer to what you just pointed out, that there are certain personality types that will have the capacity to even put their mind in this position. Because the human capacity for disbelief, I find so strong that even when something's happening that we doubt or that we don't believe is happening, we're able to almost as if block our mind and say, no, this is not happening, and put our hands over our ears, you know. And there has to be a capacity where that disbelief will reject you as a candidate in some ways. Maybe that's my question. Can prior disbelief reject you as a candidate for a visit from the supernatural? Just like people who are anti-death penalty can't serve on death penalty juries, you know what I'm talking about? So is that a situation? How if I can't be on a jury that's a death penalty case, if I'm anti-death penalty, maybe if I don't believe in UFOs, will I never get a visit? That's my question.
Not necessarily. I mean, you could not believe in UFOs and have a visitation, yes, and that's happened to a lot of people. I mean, a lot of them obviously believe it now since they've seen it.
But we're previously diehard skeptics, diehard, you know.
Well, like, you know, to a lot of these questions, the answer is everything.
Sure.
I mean,
sure.
In other words, yes, there's both things happen. You also have cases that are the opposite.
Sure. And that's natural too. That makes sense. But as a skeptic, my questions always lead back to just simple questions like that. Why would one person's disbelief create that kind of an environment where they would think that it would never happen, but then to have that 180-degree turn? What that would mean? You know, it's almost too much for me to take.
You know, something about the speed of the change. You know, that's one variable you can talk about. You know, some people change or see that difference in an instant, and they're a lot like enlightenment or something. You know, you have a mental event that's so profound that a shift is created in your synapses, and you go on, you know, with a different point of view from there on.
Mm-hmm.
Some people are more gradual. You know, the change happens more gradually with little events. And even if I look at my own life, it seems like both things have been going on. I mean, you can just view it from so many different ways. You know, I have become more and more open to different possibilities of reality, and in fact, you know, seeing disparate forms of reality interacting all the time. In fact, and you can just come at everything from so many angles that it's best just to be blank in a way, and be mean, to not have the agenda is to be free from all dogmas, or as the Buddhists say, there are a thousand Buddhists, 1,000 dharmas. Each person is going to have their own version of reality happening just for them.
Right. Yeah, I believe in that pretty strongly. That reality is viewed by the viewer, not from an external point of view.
But in my own life, there's trends where this progressive change happened with little signposts along the way, like little visions or little occurrences, synchronicities. And then the other view is that I've always sort of had a very questioning mind, and if in the Hindu pantheon, there's they go into this stuff really in a lot of detail, and they classify different types of persons. And I'm one of the persons that has that kind of an approach. It's more of a questioning, trying to use logic, in the classical sense, to understand reality, and it really works as a system. If you really follow things to their conclusions, you end up with a view of reality that's really similar to the ancient Buddhist ways, or the ancient Indian ways, Native American ways, Aboriginal ways, having to do with seeing reality as oneness, a unity underlying variety, a void underlying the manifestation of objects. This entire scene is, and physics even proves it, that you are creating what's in front of you.
No, I believe that. I do believe that. And then
but events do appear. I don't mean to interrupt you. But
yeah, no, I was just going to
events
ask the
do
same
appear
question.
and then go, and then they, in a relative sense, they're happening. I mean, ultimately, they're not happening. Ultimately, nothing is happening. This is all a manifestation of consciousness. But in a relative sense, we have to do things and go through our lives and act as if it's not a manifestation. Of course, that's the very barrier between us and enlightenment. I just think the phenomenon is it's activity from other dimensions, and those other dimensions naturally have to include our own minds, because the mind is so important in forming that vision of what the occurrence.
Well, the thing we had was the fact that events are definitely happening in an objective physical realm that we can touch, but the question is, what factor does that have in how we view the rest of the world, or can we still have a lot of self-control and self-direction over which we experience? And can we create experiences that allow us to tap into other dimensions? Was essentially one of the deepest questions that you were asking. Can we ascend to the consciousness levels where there's other voices that are waiting to talk to us? And the metaphor is the same we used earlier about altitude with the vibrations. If you can rise above the level of drug interference in your life, you could still be under the physical influence of drugs, but you wouldn't be under the mental influence of them, which is pretty powerful self-control. And that's just, if that's only one aspect of one manifestation of that experience, which I've experienced in my life personally, that I think you can be to a certain vibration where, for instance, the experience of a mushroom trip or of an acid trip is so much of a higher vibration than alcohol that alcohol doesn't really factor into that. If you've taken a hallucinogenic by drinking alcohol, you don't noticeably change your perceptions at all. You can barely even after a 6-pack of beer, I can barely even feel the beer, but I just drink it because it's a habit, you know. So I think that if you just extend that metaphor from hallucinogenics to alcohol and then move above hallucinogenics to what comes next, what comes after hallucinogenics, you know.
Bigfoot.
There's an answer. Exactly. I know there's an answer.
You know, there is literature out there that says that Bigfoot vibrates at a higher rate, and his molecules are all spread out as well, so he's able to travel through surfaces. Yeah. No one can quite figure out, though, why. Maybe you've got an intuition about this, but Bigfoot is seen oftentimes. Then he disappears right beneath a UFO or something, or he comes. He's a lot of his visits go along with a UFO sighting, and people will see him, and then he'll just disappear into thin air, or they'll shoot at him, and it'll appear to have hit him, and then he may run even. You know, it seems really physical, like what's happening is really happening. You know, but it really it's like a hologram. You know, he gets shot, but the bullets seem to go through, but he may even fall down when they shoot him. And it really looks like the thing has gotten shot, like there's really a real thing there. But they never find the body, you know.
Just maybe a reaffirmation for the shooter, for the mind of the shooter, just a reaffirmation that sort of helps them continue along with their day-to-day reality. I think if they see the image fall down, it probably confirms the fact that they feel that reality still exists in some extent. If the bullet goes through the figure, then you've run into that disbelief that I keep talking about, where can any event go on for a certain extent, and then you have a moment of disbelief? Can it wipe that whole event away? Can it erase that event from your reality, so that the event could be real for a span of minutes or seconds, but as soon as your disbelief enters a certain level, that event ceases to happen? That's sort of what I'm getting at, I guess, with the vibrations as well. Like if what you're experiencing in your vision is somewhat similar to reality, but it's slightly different, that it lets you take it as a positive thing, but you'll still accept an Alice in Wonderland viewpoint and see that things are changing, but you'll go along with it. Or if it's of a nature where that you're afraid of it, do you reject it, and then something all of a sudden happens to stop it completely, you know, and you're back to thin air. And I think that way that the communication between the two forces stops at that moment, but it certainly doesn't invalidate the previous experience. I think it just lets you. Maybe I'm wrong in this, though. Maybe there's people that want to end an experience that's paranormal that they can't end. I don't know. Maybe there's no way to snap your fingers and wake up. That's a tough one.
Although the only kicker is that there are people that think that they've done it. An enlightened person, and there are people out there who say they are. They're actually there. They believe, so therefore they have overcome the paranormal. But the Buddhists, you know, are just like, that's just other forms of consciousness arising, and you know, it's no different than the thought of me putting my milk on my cereal in the morning. And it's really important to have that ability to detach from that kind of thing. It's really just detaching from your own mind. And you were speaking earlier of that very thing, that you were wondering how you could just, you know, at some point you knew you were listening to a lot of music, you were bringing stimuli in, and then you started to wonder if, when in your quiet moments, if you could actually stop that process and just control it, and not have any of those images or sounds running through your head,
or news bites, or political hysteria, or anything. Yeah, just to clear your mind entirely and have a complete void. It's hard to do in the city, you know. It's hard to do in the country too, but it's really hard to do in the city. I guess it just depends on your mind state.
it sounds like you haven't had a paranormal event happen, or have you had one and you're wondering if you did, or I mean, it sounds like you're a skeptic maybe, and you're.
Well, my father is a firm believer in the paranormal in a lot of dimensions, and I feel like I wouldn't be a good son to him if I didn't try to experience what he's experiencing. So from my very earliest, I've had an influence in my life that's directing me to not disregard paranormal experiences. The fact that I haven't had one personally is maybe it could be called into question, because I was raised in a strict Catholic family, and I had a few experiences that I would say gave me a moment of inspiration that I ascribed to a Catholic hierarchy of God and the saints and whatever, and the communion and four times a month, and the sacraments. But I don't know. I've never had an experience that I would just chalk down as tapping into any kind of an ESP But I've had experiences where I've had connections, very, very strong mental connections that I can't explain. That's definitely happened before. Whether it's a premonition or something that's just even a dream, yeah, anything like that. Just some feeling of getting a communique on something that corresponded to the real world, the physical world as I describe it. So I'm not entirely a skeptic, but I am a skeptic though when I really get down to what forms my basic spiritual nature, because the older I get, I like to lock myself into this rigid thinking, and I don't know why I want to do that. It seems like a backward thing to do, but I want to believe that the physical realm is more real than people might imagine.
Well, I think we're all skeptics, and we're all also very gullible. And I think if we're honest with ourselves, we'll find a lot of things in our lives that we're really, really gullible about.
And hypocritical. Yeah, I agree, man.
And just when to say you're and I say the same thing. I say to people, I'm a skeptic. But that just means I'm a skeptic sometimes, depending on the subject matter, and other times I'm the opposite.
Right.
And yeah, if you do say I'm a skeptic, that is a statement of fixed thinking, and that you're saying this is what I am. You're giving a concept, you're giving a label to yourself, even if it's one that you can throw away later. You're still flirting with taking it on.
Here, let me tell you the kind of distinction I'm sort of getting at. If someone were to tell me in great faith that they feel that they were a direct manifestation of a consciousness that was born, lived a specific life in this real world that we all experienced, and then died, and now they're back again, if they told me that, I would be willing to entertain it and willing to believe it on a certain level. But if they told me that I remember that I was born on a certain date and died, and my name was this, and it was a real person, like if they say somebody that exists in the historical records, then I immediately disbelieve them. If someone told me they were Thomas Jefferson or Jesus Christ or anybody who they thought they were, even if it was a random person that wasn't famous or a celebrity, if someone said I was Marie so-and-so, a servant in France from 1734 to 1799, I would disbelieve them entirely. I wouldn't even entertain them.
What about the children that have done it, and then they've proven via their knowledge of the details that they were that person?
Then I would have to just be presented with...
There's lots of cases.
Presented with those cases, yeah. I've never really listened to them
they exist
firsthand like that. I figure... And so I would have to confront that evidence, and then make that decision of how I would want to change my viewpoints, change my framework. But I'm operating from such a rigid framework that the disbelief side has more ammunition right now. The disbelief side is basically is getting a good boost right now. I feel like I'm almost giving the disbelief side too much of a boost, maybe.
Well, one of the recent ideas that I was challenged by was the idea that a person could take over someone else's body in real time. We're not talking about somebody who died and was reincarnated, but somebody who literally takes over someone else's body, and that person, the person one, the receiver, I guess, or the body being taken over, that person decides that their soul or spirit wants to move on, and they're willing to let go of it. And then they also have to run into someone on the other end who has the control, the mental control, like a high lama or whatever. And actually, this is a story. There's been stories of lamas doing this. The lama gets old and for some reason, or gets injured, has to continue on with the work, specific task, needs another body, doesn't want to go through the rebirth process because it takes too long. And it's sort of like an emergency transmogrification, or whatever the word is for that process. And I've read a book by at least one guy who says that this happened to him, or that he did that. He went into someone else's body. So I understand that, that process that you're talking about, where you have to get your head around this belief system. I don't walk away disbelieving, though. I don't have a problem believing that that's possible. If the circumstance is right and the energy of both parties is there and it's strong enough, it could happen. Proving that is can't do it. Well, you can maybe gather some information about, as they have about these cases where people have been reincarnated. You can gather some information, but it's some people are never going to be never going to accept it just because it's so far outside the norm.
If people start believing on a mass level that paranormal experiences are not only possible but frequent, I think it would remove a lot of authority from the structures that run this country or run the world.
Well, what happens is, like with the Catholic Church, you have an initial inspiration that's valid or whatever, or arises somehow through enough people, gathers enough strength, becomes an institution. Institution develops methods for securing its own survival that contradict its original aims, and you have religion. So, I mean, the problem with a religion, all religions have a wonderful truth at their core, but the problem is the working out of that on a daily basis, and all the compromises that have to be made to run an organization, and all the various things that people bring to it, their own hang-ups and problems and karmas.
Yeah, whenever a religion gets organized, it has to start to discount the paranormal to a most degree, unless it's some kind of, well, I guess so there are some structured religions that have paranormal events within their dogmas.
Sure. I mean, all they do is they tailor it.
But it's specific ones. If you tried to convince a Catholic church of UFOs, you'd find you're probably talking to a brick wall. Whereas, yeah, they're the first ones to tell you that the Eucharist that you eat in church is actually transformed into the body of Christ through a process of transubstantiation. Still, at the same time, I feel like they would be very closed-minded to most definitions of paranormal in our society. But they want to see their own paranormal as the only paranormal.
Yeah.
They have the key to the paranormal world, And you have to just put in enough money and you'll experience it too. Maybe that's what happens. It's just paranormal capitalism. That's a good name for religion, man. But even my mom would take us out to these prayer meetings where they'd be speaking in tongues and laying hands on people and trying to do healing based on spiritual energy. So I was confronted with that at a very young age as well. And at that time, my reaction was primarily one of uncertainty and a little bit of fear, because the emotions were so high in the room that here's a lot of these adults acting in a way that's not normal to me, that's not an everyday experience. And I had my faith in adults as being rational people. That's what you look up to as a kid. And so going to a prayer meeting where there's all these people speaking in tongues, and it sounds chaotic and it sounds really strange, and singing and shouting and chanting, and I do remember having an element of fear involved with that. and I don't know if that was like one of the in my early times, if that helped color my future views. But then I always saw it as a Catholic or not a Catholic sacrament, but it's a religious sacrament. I think it is a Catholic sacrament. One of them, speaking in tongues, is one of the sacraments.
Mm-hmm.
So it's recognized by a lot of authoritative structures, but it's still to a child, and even to me now, I think I would still confront it with some I don't know, some fear, some strangeness,
Well, I experienced
uncertainty.
that. I saw that when I was a kid.
Mm.
Everywhere I've gone, this Mothman tour, see the black helicopter. Let's check this one out.
There's one over the mall right here.
This interview was done in the spring of 2003. However, there was a crackling fire, and Mercedes has kind of a soft voice, so you can't hear a whole lot of it. So we're not going to have much of it. But I was really interested in this one section where she talks about having this ability, or it occurs that she is able to see through other people's heads, eyes, sort of in real time, sort of is able to see through what other people are doing during the day, and even in dreams, seeing what they're doing in dreams. And it sort of reminds me of what I was saying earlier about the Tibetan lamas, who apparently have the ability to take over someone else's body in a case where someone is ready, willing, and able to leave their body. I would say that Mercedes' ability is sort of a precursor to the lama's abilities.
I see other people's dreams too. If I am close to someone for a period of time, like a lover, I'll start to see their dreams and even enter their body.
And would that be like a sort of just seeing through their eyes?
Yep.
Kind of thing?
That's what it feels like. It feels very much. I feel the encapsulation of being within them, and then I see what they're seeing or what they're experiencing, and can relay it to them.
And so do you also have a problem, therefore, if you're able to do that, where you're going out and into someone else, do you also have problems with, well, this is what I have problems with, is that something from someone else will come into me, and I won't know if it's me or not.
Yeah,
And this is something I ask people with this kind of ability. How do you learn to differentiate what's your own thing?
Yeah. You start really building your foundation. It's taken me years to figure out what that is, but now I can pretty much figure out what's mine and what isn't. I get hits all the time. I get people's memories. I get their whole memories.
Waking now?
Waking. Yeah. We all do this. I think we have an intuitive sense where we pick up on other people's experiences, and we'll accidentally say something. It's usually a blunder. It's usually like, I bet your son's drinking a lot, and their son happens to be in jail because they've just been caught drinking underage. And I think we all have that capability of just intuitively, and usually either blundering or in comedic, picking up on other people's memories or experiences. And sometimes I get them and they're whole. And I see it in people's bodies, and I see this now since I'm studying so much about anatomy and physiology. I can see experiences and memories and how they affect people's bodies, how they carry themselves, where it comes from. I can make guesses, and it's just about being, I think, alert, really.
Do you read auras?
No, I don't read auras.
Do you get it? Do you feel, to get this information, is it coming into your mind or through your chest, like to your heart?
No, it's mind. It's definitely mind. It's about being able to communicate it back, and that's something I'm still working on. Well, the mind is the filter, and there's lots of different religions and different groups that believe that, like Scientologists, for instance, that the mind, the mind is what you use to actively perceive and define your universe, your body, your experiences. It's a tool more than it is. It's very limited, and it can't possibly process everything that's happening. But the mind is a way to effectively use what we experience and communicate it to someone else. And I think that's our greatest gifts as humans, is being able to communicate. So the experiences that we're having, even in the paranormal, even in the normal, the experience of beauty, the experience of seeing an ancestor, being able to communicate that to someone who's receptive to it or needs to hear it. That's what the mind is.
Talk about 911, because you were saying earlier
Oh,
that
yeah.
you had a precognition. And I just want to throw in here, this is the 6th person that I know.
Well,
And we'll get Mercedes' story now.
one thing, there is that essence of collective consciousness, and there is, if a large group of people, like the 6 people that you know, were feeling this and anticipating this event, they were probably affecting 6 other people that weren't even aware. That's our bodies and our energy, especially if we're anticipating a major traumatic event. Before 9/11, I had had a dream of witnessing, and I didn't know it was going to be buildings, but emotion, a feeling. It wasn't necessarily visual, which, despite how visual 9/11 was, it really was more about a feeling. This collapsing and this shuddering. And there was a guy in the dream that said Phoenix Rising at the end of the dream. The bird rising from the ashes.
Would that be the Bush administration with
Yeah.
their war machine?
Exactly. And then I was drawing in my journal, and I have no idea why I drew this, but I drew a couple of people waiting at the bus stop that was right at the base of the Twin Towers, because I used to work there for Cantor's Fitzgerald, and I used to ride this bus up the street. Not the subway, but the street bus. So I drew this picture of the 2 towers. They were coming up like this, and there's people waiting there. For some reason, it all felt like something was going to happen. I didn't know what. But maybe that drawing and that feeling were connected. I have a thing around death that also started when I was younger. In some of these dreams, I would fly and I would be by the bedside of people that were dying. And I'd hold their hand. And my grandmother just passed away on Saturday. But I knew she had passed, her soul had passed 2 days prior, because I had this intense, it's like a ringing, it's not really a ringing, it's this numb feeling that enters my head, and it's just flooding, and it had happened once before when her sister passed, and I knew the exact moment that she passed, both body and soul. My grandmother's soul left, and my mother knew it as well. We talked about it later in the day. She knew when it had happened. We both knew it, and I had this incredible feeling. And when I was with her just before it happened, and I was holding her hand, and I could hear the things that she wanted to be told, and so I talked to her. And I tried to channel my brother there and speak to her as though I was him, because she really was missing him. And
This is when you were actually
that's when I was with her.
in there.
Yeah. That's when I was with her. And my brother said that he was at that time crying and was feeling as though he was being pulled. He didn't know I was doing this, but that he was being pulled to her bedside and that he was seeing her. And I was trying so hard to get him there.
That same thing happened when my mother died. I knew the minute it happened.
Yeah.
And I understand now the meaning behind the phrase "passed," because it really felt like she passed me by. Like it was in the middle of the night. We were asleep. I wake up. I'm having body convulsion, like convulsions in my body, and I knew what it was. I knew it was her. I was experiencing what she was experiencing as she was leaving her body. And I swear I felt a shadow go by. There's these weird buttons on here. Sure.
It's funny how you start to get used to all the things that come at you. They don't seem so weird anymore.
Yeah, that's true. None of this stuff seems weird to me anymore.
Well,
It seems normal to me now. I'm surprised when people don't, try to fight the feeling, try to fight
I definitely fight it. I for a long time I did everything I could to keep it out of my life. Well, yeah. When I went to college and moved to New York City, I had all these little rituals for keeping it away from me, because it became pretty powerful. Right in my early 20s, it was too intense. I didn't know.
What was going on?
I was seeing things. I was seeing things that were in other people's lives. I was just all sorts of things, and all sorts of things. My father, a good friend of mine, just things that were coming at me, and I just tried to get rid of it. I didn't want it around, so I actually read about different rituals to keep things out of your life, and did them. Mirrors, water, all sorts of things, just to keep it away.
So, just have you had any experiences with things like Mothman, aliens, UFOs, any of that stuff, or is this all just
No.
coming from?
No,
You're
and
just like pure psychic and nothing. See, I think what the reason people see these entities or ships or whatever it is they see is because they can't access the psychic world, and this is it's like a slap on the, it's like a tap. It's like saying, hey, there's more out there. Like when I saw my being, it was a real shock. It was like, what was that?
the only thing I've seen is a chupacabra. You know what that is?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and I used to draw drawings of him.
What year?
I don't know when I saw him. I started drawing him probably 96, 97. I started drawing him.
You just started drawing them. I mean, wait, how did you see one? Tell us about your. How you saw it.
I can't even really explain it. It's not like I necessarily saw a chupacabra walking down the street.
Mhm.
It's that I started to draw this figure, and then things about a chupacabra were coming to people were telling me about it, and I had a very clear idea of what this being was. Really clear idea. Still have it as to what it is and what it does.
And what would that be?
Well, it's an animal. I don't know that it's alien, but it's like a human dog animal. It has this, it has a long jaw as though a horse would have or a dog would have, and it's really long legs, and it can run exceedingly fast, like faster than we may be even able to perceive.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that it lives and exists here on this planet, and that there's probably a good portion of these creatures, but they're not. I mean, that could be the reason why we don't see them, is they literally exist in a realm that we cannot perceive, which I do believe that there are creatures in this world and in other worlds that we just can't perceive them. I don't necessarily think they're aliens, they come from another planet, but I do think that there are other realms that are beyond our senses.
You can take them up to the bedroom if you want.
Thanks, Kenny.
Thank you. Well, it's interesting because that's the most credible theory out there, that for me, is that Bigfoot,
Yeah.
Black Panthers, big black dogs, aliens, they all exist on slightly different dimension,
Yeah.
or
Yeah.
their molecules are spread out. I mean, they have an electromagnetic charge to them.
Right.
They can be measured. There's
Definitely.
the light, the way they come in with an infrared light, and then they'll pass, like a UFO, or will pass through it'll pass through the spectrum of colors and then go out the other side, as if it just exists in a range outside our perception normally.
Could be diaper too.
Yeah, probably is.
Yeah.
But this concept that they're there, like there's probably a few parked out there right now. We just don't see them because they don't
Huh.
reflect light in the spectrum that we can see. And there's evidence, if you really look at sightings and the way they happen, that it just, it's like we're existing on this dimension and they come through one side out the other.
Absolutely. And we're working on technology to try to break into those dimensions, breaking sound, breaking light. And I mean, once we start to exceed with our own technology, we will begin to see things that we never expected right here.
Now, when you say the technology that came to my mind when you said that was the technology that's been around forever that holy people or shamans have used. You know, they've always been able to see these things.
Mm-hmm.
It sounded like you were you referring to that, or
No, I'm actually referring to supersonic travel and
yeah.
you know,
On a mass
wavelengths,
scale.
microwaves, cellular waves. Yeah, on an atomic scale, going down to a very basic. As we start to experiment with new forms of communication and technology, we are going to break into realms. We are going to see more things.
My experience with an animal like that is that I always had nightmares of Bigfoot coming into my house, and sometimes most of the time they were white, like they were Yeti, and sometimes they glowed, like they were psychic beings or something, and I often dreamed of them in connection with UFOs, and I had this whole dream scenario in my conscious mind. I dreamed it enough that I knew what it was. And this was in the mid '80s. Well, then I started looking into the literature and I started finding references to Bigfoots being seen around UFOs.
Right.
It's very common.
Right.
So suddenly, that was one of my first epiphanies. It was like, wow, I've been dreaming about that, and that's very strange. Why would I be dreaming about it, and then why would, what's the connection between my dreaming it and other people seeing that strange juxtaposition?
Right.
And I started to view it as an interface between my mind and reality, and that I could somehow control it, or I could start to work with it. And so I had this long progression of being terrified of these Bigfoot, hiding, to going to look out the window, to a year of dreaming about looking out the window and being scared, and then a year where I just tried to turn my head to look at them, and then
Right.
Eventually I turn to look and I see it,
Right.
and it just walks away or something, or they hide, or they're whatever. And then the last time I dreamed about it, I looked at it and it turned into a dog, just a little innocent dog.
Interesting. I'm a very visual person, and I find that sometimes that can be really difficult. Like I can catch really small things, and like films sometimes can be just so overwhelming for me, or looking at things can be really overwhelming. I do a lot of, I fight with all this stuff, but I went and got trained as a healer and got a certificate to be a minister, thinking I would start to do some hands-on work. And I did some work on a couple of people, some hands-on stuff, and a lot of it was visual. Almost all of it was visual, touching their bodies, seeing where to touch, letting them tell me where to touch. Like an animal, will move when you wants to be touched a certain place. People's energy starts to move that way, and you can feel it in their body, where to touch them. And sometimes that would come with imagery or memory.
So you would sense their memories as you work their energy field?
Yeah.
I'm actually learning a similar technique now called body talk.
Yeah.
It's a tapping thing. It has Tibetan, Aboriginal, Chinese medicine aspects to it. But it's basically just what you're talking about, where the person lies down and you ask their innate, and you get yeses and nos by doing muscle testing, just a little.
Oh, I've heard of this. Yeah.
But it's very similar to what you're saying. So what happened with that? Did you?
It depends on. I always feel like if you're invited to do it, then that you're supposed to be there. I haven't been invited for a while. I've been working a lot on myself for the past 2-3 years. A lot on myself. I'm not healing myself. I'm just doing work on myself. Visuals. Dreams, yeah. Yoga. A lot of body work. A lot of dancing, meditating. A lot of very private time away from people. Trying not to have people be very close. Not a lot of physical contact. Just being on my own.
The future is clouded and again, positively earthling, not in a million light years.
Well, Andy Colvin here. It's March. What is the date? The 18th? 17th? March 19th, 2003. The day of the invasion of Iraq. While those people are doing that, we're here in Seattle investigating, once again, 905 East Pine. A location we got from an early Mothman author's book, and finding psychic scat here of the Mothman. We found drawing of the Mothman, markings in the sidewalk that looked like Sasquatch markings that have been seen in other places of the world. Harriet's initials, her dad saying on a poster, the word shadow, harking back to my sighting of my own shadow, the caped shadow. Okay, here we are looking at the drawings at 905 East Pine sidewalk. This one is of particular interest here. These are very similar to the drawings I found in the Psychic Sasquatch book, and Kenny is now saying that he's seen the same markings. So you've seen these too?
I have seen. Well, I've seen markings like this in this park called Seward Park. It's just this. It's really strange. It's the only like overgrown, untouched park in Seattle where you can walk into there. You're actually in the wilderness. And somebody every once in a while when I go in there has put markings on the path, like throughout the whole park. It's like about 2 miles of 2 or 3 miles of paths and walkways, and they're all over the place sometimes. I mean, they're throughout the whole park, throughout the whole route that I walk. I can see these kind of very similar to these. You know, it's up.
What's the history of the park?
I don't know.
Wasn't it an Indian sacred site?
It was an Indian. I don't know, a sacred site. I know it was. Yeah, it was an Indian. It was actually an island originally.
But
that
sounds
a connection to it, and it was a place that they would go that was supposedly holy or sacred.
That sounds similar to Point Pleasant, where the Mothman was seen so much. That was also a sacred Indian area. But Mercedes isn't as convinced. Is that right? What's going on with Mercedes?
I don't know what's going on with Mercedes. She's just. I just find it interesting that we parked. You know, looking for a parking spot. We parked right in front of it.
Well, when I came up, you guys were standing right at 905. You didn't know where the address was, but you were standing right in the spot.
Well, what's weird was for some reason I thought 905 would be that direction, and as I came to this intersection, I decided to turn this way, and then you called me on the phone, and I answered, and there was a parking spot right here. Even though I was consciously I was gonna turn down that way, and then I ended up turning here for some reason. I don't know why. Interesting picture that scribbling that was on this wall.
Mercedes appears to have honed in on the spot. This is in the southwest stairwell of 905. For today's investigations, we've pulled out the tri-field meter once again.
Right. Yeah.
See, normally I don't get a reading anywhere, anytime with this meter. It always stays on 0, unless you get your hand really close to it or something. In this case, once it stabilizes to the spot, then it only reads changes from then on. So once it gets acclimated, it's really just a matter of if that needle moves. But in this case, it's staying at a high level the whole time.
For movement, that just changed it. I think there may be too much movement in the stairwell. Right in that corner is that's me.
I wouldn't call it normal though. It seems to me like it's more active than it usually is.
It's right here that it was really active. Their shaft.
We're gonna try to see what's on the other side of this. Oh, it's the elevator shaft, and you know what? Maybe the guy who killed himself here jumped down the elevator shaft. It's an elevator shaft, so that might explain the electromagnetic activity.
That's probably what's happening.
So we've got another piece of technology here. It's the Gauss meter. Now, when you get a 0 on the Gauss meter at a spot where you get a high number on this, it means that the field that is here is magnetic, which, it's a little strange.
And then we're like, oh, maybe let's go see what's on the other side. There's the elevator. So we're saying, the electricity in the elevator is changing the readings.
So we're getting a 0 on our alpha
But he's
meter.
getting a 0 on the electricity.
So it must be magnetic.
But that may be an elevator. Who's
So you're talking about Princess Angeline?
Princess Angeline.
In the
She's
market?
Seattle's doctor. Yeah, she's Native American. She's really piercing blue eyes. Her mother was from a tribe that's up in the San Juans, and more of an Irish, red hair, blue eyes. And she is down in the lower levels, and a lot of, especially older people, see her quite a bit.
Right.
Wow.
The New Congress Club, whatever that is. Joe Swiftka. What? Here's one that I want to talk a little bit about here after I get a still shot. Now what that image reminded me of was the duck in the noose. The duck in the noose reference from the DC Sniper. Yeah, and we've already talked about, I've already talked about how the DC Sniper went to the mosque that was on my block, and that I met him at the gymnasium. Now I'm seeing a reference to the very code words that were used to bring him in, so to speak. My question is, what is it about this magnetic field at this spot that makes people draw things and do things that are that all seem to be interconnected in some way with the national security state or Mothman or whatever?
But I don't know. Maybe if you just look for it, it's all there.
Yeah.
Maybe it's everywhere.
So really, the phenomenon just makes us all pay attention more.
Sure, and I think again, there's that collectiveness that once people become aware of a certain area, just like a religious place or spiritual place, people start to congregate there. There is an awareness that's shared.
Orion's belt. This is the Plato, like in the Plato? Okay.
Plato. And which a lot of like Christian concepts are directly linked to that. The mystery, the mystic aspect of early Christianity has developed the Essenes, and Judaism. There's a link to this. They got into this. Texts were translated into the Greek and this Plato's concepts, but you have your daemon, which is your seed and your acorn that you are born with. You're consciously put out into this world with this idea in you, this seed that needs to grow in you, and unless it becomes nurtured, unless it becomes allowed to be, then it turns on you, becomes demonic.
Okay, the Mothman Trail has taken me once again to the American Southwest. After leaving West Virginia here in May 2003, I've now gone to New Mexico. I'm in Albuquerque. The Southwest is a place I've always been drawn to, and the reasons for why I've been drawn to it, I think, are related to my early exposure to the Mothman. There's an intuitive aspect. Once you've become connected with the Mothman story, when I was a child and we had built the shrine of the Mothman, and Tommy had said, "Hey, the Mothman has come to where we built the shrine." I didn't believe him, but at least until a few days later, when there's a lot of wildlife here in New Mexico on the ranch. As I was driving home from bowling with my parents one night, we were crossing the Dunbar toll bridge, and I thought I saw the Mothman flying above the car. It actually is really close to the overpass bridge that the spherical object was seen on. So I always connected the Mothman with Dunbar and St. Albans, and of course those areas are heavily industrial. So whenever these theories have come up about the Mothman being an industrial creation or somehow connected with the Defense Department and some electromagnetic experimentation or chemical experimentation or chemical accident, that always seemed to fit with my intuitive feelings. Another intuitive thing was just my whole connection with the Southwest. And it came on at around the same time after Tommy and I built the shrine. The other artistic endeavor that I really jumped on as soon as this stuff started happening was photography. I remember the same year that this was going on, I ordered a camera from Bazooka Joe, I think, or maybe it was Mallow Cups. You collect the Mallow Cup cards, you order the camera. And bizarrely enough, my first photograph was of a large moth. The stuff was just in the background. I didn't know until the early 90s that the Keel book existed and all of these details about Point Pleasant existed. For me, it had just been an interesting childhood and things. I knew there was something to it that was unusual, and I thought that someday I might be able to tell the story, give it a context. So I have to thank John Keel for helping give that context. But here in the Southwest, as I said, I've been here a lot and gone to several pueblos and been to the Hopi Reservation, the Navajo Reservation, several of the other reservations over the years. And the Thunderbird comes up quite often in most of the Indian traditions, especially even in the Northwest where I live. And just to show how easy it is to draw these parallels between the two and how obvious it is that the Indians have been on to the Mothman for so long. It's just that, I just picked up a couple of books here at random at the ranch here, and I'll show you the book here. And it's called The Spirit Within, Northwest Coast Native Art. And then the other one is, where's the other one? Oh, well, hold on here. I think earlier I mentioned the book by Duwani Yahu, a Cherokee woman and she mentions how central the Garuda or Thunderbird or Mothman was to the Cherokee traditions. Just as an example of how easy it is to see these parallels, I just grabbed a couple of books at random here at the ranch and looked in the back for references to the Thunderbird. And this first book, Native American Myths and Legends by Colin Taylor, has quite a few interesting connections with the West Virginia story. You know, and it's in these little details that it really comes out. I mean, they're just too. There are too many of them for it just to be coincidental, in my opinion. So let's take a look at this first book, and I'll just go through the references to the Thunderbird in order, and you can see the parallels. So there's our book, Native American Myths and Legends. You see images of the Garuda throughout Native American artwork. And here's a couple. In this first reference, it has to do with the Thunderbird and his direct connection with thunder and lightning, and of course that's why he's called the Thunderbird. But the connection with West Virginia here is that I was reading in a book by an Englishman who went around studying the electromagnetic effects of UFOs or of geomagnetic places and UFOs. It's called the electromagnetic indictment by I think his name's Budden, Albert Budden. In that book he says that if you live close to electromagnetic sources like mining, towers, radio towers, things like that, and if there's a lot of thunder and lightning, that this will increase the effect, and then people will see UFOs and aliens much more readily. The percentage is much higher in these areas, and this is certainly what the Native American legends are saying, is that the Thunderbird, is there where there's lots of thunder. They attribute the thunder and lightning to the bird, but of course it could be the other way around. Depending on how you look at it, it could be that the thunder and lightning are helping the bird to be seen more. And certainly on Woodward Drive, that's the case. I mean, just tremendous thunderstorms, and the pipeline connecting my house with Harriet and Tommy's house and the church, and also the power lines that are down near the bottom of Woodward Drive, where Charlie Manson and Sarah Jane Moore lived. Of course, Charlie and Sarah Jane Moore didn't necessarily see UFOs, but certainly there's a possibility that these kinds of fields could affect one's mental state. Now, this next reference in the book is really interesting. There's two images side by side. One is of the Thunderbird, which looks unusually, just amazingly like the image of the Mothman on the Lauren Coleman book. And next to it is an image of the Thunder Being. There's the Thunderbird and there are the Thunderbeings, which are these humans who are connected with the Thunderbirds. Now, the Thunderbirds themselves are human, or can be seen as half human. But these Thunderbeings are more, distinctly human, which really gives credence to this theory by this mysterious general Downing, who claims that the Men in Black, the real Men in Black, are occult studying humans who understand the nature of the Mothman to the degree that they can rein them in. So let's look at the image here, and I think you'll find them interesting. Here's the first image. Now, the literature here says, although occurring in many southeastern cultures, the immortals, here the Thunderbird is described as an immortal. The immortals are most fully described by the Cherokees. Usually invisible, they disregard natural law and live where they wish, beneath waters of lakes, in the sky, or beneath the earth. The Cherokees call these Nunahi, and they often disguise themselves as women. because they love to dance and are hairless and tall. These Nunahi often will come to the experiencer and ask them if they would like to go away from the world of the white man. And this is exactly what happened to Harriet when she saw her being. And it's interesting that her being looks like the second illustration on this page. And let's take a look at it. This is the Thunderbeing. Now Harriet's didn't look exactly like that, but the interesting thing about this Thunderbeing is that it had talons for hands, and that is what Harriet's being had, talons for hands. It happened to be cloaked and hooded, but that little detail right there is really interesting. Now the other thing about this Thunderbeing is that it has a cape on. And of course, the being that I saw, even though it was a shadow being and just completely dark, I saw what looked like a cape. It didn't look like wings as if it was a Mothman, but a cape. And this might explain what I saw. Whereas Tommy saw the Mothman at that spot, Harriet saw a thunder being that looked like an alien, or looked like the Braxton County Monster. I saw a thunder being that took a slightly different form. Here's Pilot Knob in Tennessee, which is a spot that the Cherokees held dear. Here's a shot of Devil's Tower in Wyoming, near the Lakota lands. The Lakota called the Thunderbird Wakinian, and it's specifically with the Lakota that we find lots of references to the Thunderbird being half human. Here's an image of the Thunderbird from the northwest coast. For the Tlingit tribe in the northwest, even seeing a Thunderbird was considered an auspicious event and would make the person, quote, wealthy. And that's not just in terms of monetary, but spiritually. One of the stories that comes up in this book is that there's often a battle that's talked about between the Thunderbirds and the Ravens. The Ravens also are seen, can appear as half human. There's a connection between the Raven and the Thunderbird that's talked about in the legends. At times they're set to battle each other, with the Raven attempting to control weather and make it so cold that the Thunderbird can't survive, and so the Thunderbird produces the thunder in order to keep himself warm. What I find interesting is that Ravenswood, West Virginia, has had so many Mothman events or UFO events over the years. Because the place names, once you get into this phenomenon, you find that the place names, have a lot to do with things. And a place called Ravenswood was probably named, for some Indian legend that had to do with the raven. So where you have the raven, you often have the Thunderbird, and it's another little piece of evidence that the western part of West Virginia was seen by the Indians as a place where the Mothman or Gerudo would live. Here's an image of an Iroquois false face ritual. On page 130 of this book, here's a really exciting reference for me because it refers to the mystery that I've been working on for 22 years now, which is why Harriet got a message from a medium spiritualist in Columbus in 1981 that my dad said to tell me that I had a protector. Because on page 130 here it says that the Thunderbird was a guardian spirit, and it was a common visionary quest of youths, particularly men, because those who received visions of it were blessed with victory in war and protection in life. So clearly it's saying here that according to the Indians, to see the Thunderbird was to was to gain a protector. And perhaps I've answered perhaps in this is a saying that my mystery is solved.